I have absolutely no idea where I am right now. And I can't see because the sun is... Yeah, never mind, I'll just put those on. Oh, some shadow. That's a miracle. So, my room is so messy at the moment that there is absolutely no possibility of finding a single spot where I could shoot a video. So I was like, I'm gonna go outside. It's a brilliant idea since it's 32 degrees and everyone is out and every single shady spot that I've seen on my way here was already taken. So I'm sitting, I'm not sure if I want to show you because it's this like sort of really weird industrial area, but you can see the river, or you probably can't, but it's still pretty nice. And I really hope someone is not going to come here and steal my camera, because that would be a shame because I'm going on my holiday tomorrow. Anyway, it's not very good. So I was thinking, because I don't really have that much time and every single idea I've tried, why am I picking some weird stuff from the ground? Didn't really work out, you know? I actually shot a video yesterday and it basically, I couldn't speak. Like my brain froze and I was like, bleh. So that would be very hard to edit. So I was like, no, well, I guess we're gonna leave that for another time. Something's making really weird noises right there. So I was thinking, for something really relaxing and fitting the mood, I can just talk about my favorite periods in fashion history. So I'm gonna try and make it kind of chronological because, okay, don't ask me stupid questions. Why does it taste like warm beer? I don't know what warm beer tastes like. Oh, never. So one of my favorite periods in fashion that I haven't really done good research on and I don't really know crap about, but I still kind of admire it from the distance, and I'm thinking, you know, one day I might kind of delve into it and, you know, do some more research and read about it and actually find out about particular like decades or styles that I like, is Renaissance. At that time, fashion between the countries was like really all over the place. Like you could tell where someone's from just by the type of clothes they wore. So I don't like all of the Renaissance, I'll just call it Ren. I don't really like all the clothes that they wore back then, but I do like English clothes from that era and Italian clothes, though not the mainstream ones, but I really like what they wore in Venice, because that stuff is that's some really messed up stuff. And I haven't done much research on either of those things. I'm a little more informed when it comes to English Renaissance, just because that's kind of like an old interest of mine, whereas the Venice stuff is the fresh one. But I just discovered those really weird styles and dresses and hairstyles, and I just find it so odd that it's actually fascinating. And what I really love about fashions from that era is in the English fashion that everything was just so strict, and I'm in love with ruffs as well, so that kind of makes it really easy for me to love that kind of fashion. Definition one though is so weird. Like I saw the you know, fashion plates, not really fashion plates, like paintings from the era and drawings, and I was like, wow, I love this crap. I really need to do more research on it, preferably by going to Venice in my new costume. In the English one, I like kind of late 1500s. I like Elizabethan fashion, not so much Tudor. But that's about as early as I go when it comes to something that really inspires me in fashion history, because before that there isn't really much stuff that interests me. Like I quite like the ancient Roman outfits with those like nicely done hair, but other than that, the whole medieval era is kind of like, nah. So that's the earliest one. Then we have the Baroque, which I love, and again, I'm not crazy about every single Baroque style there is, but I really love Dutch Baroque. Well, happy birthday to you. And I find it really fascinating with all this, how it was really like severe and composed, and you know, you had black dresses and white headpieces and white ruffs, and it was just like really strict. And then at the same time, what was fashionable in like the mainstream fashion was those really like decorated dresses, so it kind of like this contrast, I don't know, it's just cool. And I love films set in like 17th century Netherlands, so this was supposed to be like a fancy addition to this video and I'm digging it less and less with every sip. I mean, it's not, yeah, no, it's bad. So Baroque, and also I think English Baroque isn't too bad either, but it's definitely less specific in a way. It's kind of more all over the place. And I don't mean like later 1600s, because that stuff is messed up. Like, I don't know who came up with the, you know, weird frizzy bangs hairstyle, but it just, I can't imagine a single person that looks good in this. And even when they do films set in that era, they usually just pretend that trend didn't exist. So then we have 18th century. Is that a poop? The first half of 1700s is not my favorite. I think it's cool and it looks nice, but it's not something I would want to recreate or like be more interested in, with one exception, and that, again, I wonder if it looks like I'm doing drugs. So basically I love like 1750s Venetian outfits again, because they were just so weird. The typical ones that are sort of portrayed in the paintings and stuff. Paintings where you have like a lot of people and there's always someone in the background dressed in those like really weird traditional clothes. Those were wore during the masquerade, and basically it's like a black cloak that reaches your elbows, I think, and those white odd mask, and then you have a tricorn, and those were worn by gentlemen and ladies. And I really need to do more research on it because I don't want to give you false information on that, but I really love that style and it's just so creepy and cool at the same time. So that's the first half of the 18th century. And also another thing in the first half of the 18th century that I do love are riding habits, and that actually applies to probably every single era that ever was and that ever made riding habits fashionable, because I think in the 17th century that's when it sort of became a thing. They came up with the idea that a riding habit, since it was something masculine that you would do, you know, ride a horse, that's kind of like a masculine thing, you could wear clothes inspired by men. And I love when you know, women's fashion adapt men's fashion trends. In riding habits it kind of was supposed to look masculine, so you would wear like a really high-necked shirt and you would wear a cravat usually, and you would wear a jacket that was sort of inspired by menswear, and I think that makes women look really powerful, especially when the riding habit is huge, because in 1740, 1750 those huge panniers were still in fashion. So I think that's a really interesting combination, to have something like really feminine, which is those huge elegant dresses, and then mix it with something super masculine, which is military style jackets. They were also usually really prettily embroidered, like heavily embroidered, and that's just really cool. And my favorite riding habits are from like mid 1700s onwards, and it basically goes on till 1930s. So then we have 1760s, which is something I quite like, but it's still not there yet, if you know what I mean. I don't really have a particular style I like. I have a piece of clothing I really like, and that's jackets in every single form, either caraco jackets or Brunswick jackets or whatever you call those. Caraco, that was something that was worn mostly by like middle class. Then it kind of made it into mainstream fashion around 1780s. So that's something I like, and I also really like those like mustard yellow gowns that are fashionable in 1760s especially, I think. So then we have 1770s, which is sort of when, for me, 18th century fashion becomes acceptable. I'm not really into those like huge court gowns or anything. I like more casual outfits, and especially English fashion. Again, back in 18th century, differences between countries were still quite visible. For England and France, that's kind of true in every single era, because they were constantly fighting, and they were just like, okay, so who's gonna be fashionable now, huh? So for some reason I always prefer English fashions. That's probably because A, I'm an Anglophile, and B, because English fashions are a bit more simple, I guess, and also a lot of it is inspired by menswear, which is again something I quite like in women's fashion. So English fashions from the 1770s and 1780s are definitely something I like. But then around 1790 is kind of where I get like, meh. The Regency fashion. The Regency fashion for me is a really weird period, because I used to love it, and I used to really, that was probably my favorite period in fashion history, because it was so feminine, because it was so delicate, because Jane Austen. And everyone starting out with costumes is usually obsessed with Pride and Prejudice, and is usually obsessed with Jane Austen, and that's how a lot of people get into costuming, is because they've read the books and they're kind of like, so what can I do next? And some of them, like me, find a, Jane Austen dance group and learn to dance and go to their first ball, and that's where they need the first dress, and then they discover fashion history blogs and stuff like that. But after a while, when you get to know the era better and when you get to know other eras better, I don't know, to me it started to be boring at some point. Like, we had this annual event with my friends where you had to have like a full Regency wardrobe, and I really have no clue what to do, because the cut is almost always the same. Like, the only thing you can make different is, the patterns on the fabric, the sleeves maybe, the neckline, but other than that, after a while, obviously there's a lot of interesting fashion plays that you can recreate, but the base for me, it stays the same. So, I've made a lot of Regency dresses because of all the balls that I had to go to, and it probably would make more Regency dresses because you don't want to dance in the same thing the whole time. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think Regency era is just the mainstream for me, So I'm just gonna skip straight to 1840s, which is an era that also kind of got me into costuming. Even though I don't really own that many dresses from that era, I probably own only 2. One of those is rubbish, so I don't really own any. But it started because of the 2011 Jane Eyre movie that I've seen, and I was obsessed with the costumes in it, and I think because of that film I think I was looking at the pictures from the film, and that's how I discovered pictures, of people wearing similar costumes, but they were not from the film, and I was like, well, how did that happen? And it turned out that people made their own costumes. So because I loved the costumes so much, it kind of gave me this push to start sewing and stuff. So my very first dress was the Regency one because I had to go to a ball, but then the first one that I made completely by myself, and that was kind of like my project rather than a costume I need, was an 1840s dress. What I love about them, and again, it's more about English fashions because they were more strict because of Queen Victoria. They were kind of like really, really simple, really modest, kind of like earthy toned, whereas the French fashions were more frilly, more like frivolous, and the colors were more like vivid. So because of that, I like English fashion a bit more. I love the silhouette because it's kind of like really strict, and it's like a typical Victorian silhouette, and it just works so well with the landscape, man. So yeah, 1840s definitely, and it's kind of hard to have a right silhouette because you need a really tight waist, and at the same time you want the skirts to be really full, like this bell-shaped skirt, which is also kind of hard to achieve because you need the right petticoat and everything. So I think that's probably why I never actually attempted a proper 1840 outfit. 1850s are okay, but only in some cases. So I hate a lot of things about the 1850s fashion. I hate the huge sleeves, the pagoda sleeves. I hate the plaid dresses that make it look like you're wearing a blanket or something. I hate the frilly skirt, but I do love the more strict version of this style, which is, it probably has to be early 1850s, where women wore tight sleeves and the dresses are made from some kind of taffeta, I think, because it's a bit shiny. I've seen it a lot in the portraits, in like daguerreotypes, and it just works so cool. It just looks amazing on women, and I also prefer 1850s hairstyle to 1840s hairstyle. 1860s is sort of like a really weird era for me because that's another one of those eras. I think it's similar to Regency era dresses where everyone starting out wants an 1860s dress because it has a crinoline underneath. One of the very first costumes I made was an 1860s dress. I don't really know why, but everyone just seems to want an 1860s dress. But when you really start seeing fashion plates from the era, you notice more and more things you don't like about it. And those things would be, again, the pagoda sleeves, weird raised waistline, and the crinolines are not that big. I used to be fascinated with 1860s fashion, but now it's really hard for me to find something I like about the era. There are particular dresses, especially those of like solid colors that have black decoration. I don't really like 1870s fashion. I think it's way too frilly I think the time it becomes acceptable for me is after the natural form era, which is 79 to 82, I think. And when the second bustle appears, like when the second bustle era appears, that's when I kind of find it acceptable, and that's one of those eras I really like. I think it's because it's kind of like a default Victorian look for some reason. When you think Victorian, you usually think late Victorian. You don't usually think like 1860s, but you have in mind, you know, bustle dresses and those like fancy hats. And I think that's also thanks to steampunk and stuff like that, because they mostly draw from that decade and 1890s, I guess. But I really like it because it's really Victorian in a way, like those really tight bodices, and I really like the shape it gives, just like the silhouette it gives. What I don't like about this era though are asymmetrical elements, like asymmetrical overskirts or asymmetrical bodices. I just don't really like things when they're not symmetrical. And it's also kind of hard to do on your own because you have to balance it right, you know, when something's asymmetrical, you kind of have to think how you're gonna do it and stuff. So I don't like to think, you know. 1890s. 1890s are one of my favorite eras in fashion. Weirdly, because I used to dislike them a lot. I don't like the ball gowns, I don't like really frilly dresses of the 1890s, sort of like girly dresses, but I do like everything that's dark and kind of like autumn-like from 1890s. I used to hate those huge sleeves because they look ridiculous in fashion plates, but I've seen them. I think I made a jacket from 1890s and I was like, oh, that looks damn fine. And I think it's not until you see them on an actual person that you appreciate that style. Kind of same goes for 1830s, except I don't like 1830s fashion even when I see it in, you know, on a person, but I think it looks much better on a person than it does on a fashion plate or like on a portrait. But 1890s are again very like Victorian. They are also kind of ridiculous. I don't know. I love the weird hats with like whole birds on them. That's just so weird. I love the huge sleeves and I kind of like the overall silhouette. 1900, that's a weird fashion era for me because I used to be obsessed with it and now I kind of have narrowed down my interest to particular years, weirdly. So I used to be in love with the whole decade and I used to be in love particularly in the beginning of the decade, which is like 1900s to 1903. And when I got more into it and I started realizing, you know, what kind of separate styles they had for each year and stuff, I was like, I don't actually enjoy it that much. So I think 1900s are acceptable for me and work best when it's like 1907 to 1909. That's kind of my favorite styles. But 1903 is way too like floppy. But 1907 is damn fine. 100% would work. 1910s, I'm not a huge fan. I don't know, maybe that's because I've never worn stuff from that era. I quite enjoy wartime fashion, sort of like 1916, just because it's so ridiculous. 1920s, to be completely honest, I mean, I do enjoy them, but I'm not like super obsessed. I think earlier part of the decade works better for me than the later part. 1940s, it's a decade I used to hate. I used to be like, it's so floppy. Why would you wear like those weird shoulders? It's so awful. And then I discovered some Instagram accounts that were dedicated to 1940s, and I was like, so that's when I sort of discovered that what you see on fashion plates is not always the truth, and also it's not like they had one single style for one era. It's so much more than that. There are so many styles in 1940s that you can either love or hate, but you should know about them. And I personally find it fascinating when I discover a new era and I'm like, so I've only seen like 0.5% of what actually was in there, didn't I? I could do a separate video on 1940s, so I'll just skip that. I've just notice it looks like I'm sitting on some kind of a desert. If I have to talk about my favorite eras, they would probably end around 1940s. I used to like 1950s a lot, and I still think it's a great piece of fashion designing. 1950s fashion is probably a peak in like, artistic approach to fashion. But when it comes to my favorite eras, I don't think I would list 1950s. So these are my favorite eras in fashion history. I hope that wasn't too boring. I was enjoying it way more than this. I'm gonna take a break right now because I'll be away and there's probably no way for me to upload videos while I am away. So follow my Instagram, I probably will be posting stuff there. I'm still very much involved in my secret project that I have not told you about, and I still probably am not going to, so that's why the videos are so rare, but you know, quality, not quantity. That also means less money for me, so that's not the best option. But yeah, see you in August, I guess, in late August or even in September. Oh my goodness, my face is so sweaty, I could fill that cup in a second. So yeah, enjoy your holiday, as I sure will. Holidays? Holy moly. No, that was awful.